Alright, so chat, today the topic of discussion in this video is going to be, as you guys have seen from the title, Memory of Chaos needs a rework. I feel like I'm starting to go into my constructive criticism arc of Honkai Starbucks ever since Global Passive, and also, considering that we just had a pretty interesting discussion topic about the Sunday situation, I think this is also pretty, in the words of Tectone, apropos, right? It's pretty apropos to start this, if I can say so myself. Right? So the reason why I wanted to bring up this discussion is because the 1st of April, I started this poll on my Twitter. If you guys follow my Twitter, just follow my handle over here. How was the new Memory of Chaos for you? Alright, so we have a 21.2% easier, 36.4% no difference, as well as a 42.4% it got harder, right? So you can see that the percentage that felt that it got harder is quite literally the double, right? Double of people that felt that it was easier. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to type down how it felt for you as a player right now. Welcome back to the video, right? Welcome back to the video. So with that out of the way, the reason why I wanted to basically talk about this is because I feel that Memory of Chaos as an endgame mode, it could use this rework, namely because I feel like it's starting to lose its identity. And the reason why I say this is because for our current endgame content in Honkai Starbucks, there are 3, right? We have MOC, we have Pure Fiction, and we have Epoch Shadows. So to first examine what exactly is the problem that I want to bring up, especially because of this Memory of Chaos, is because first things first, memory turbulence. I think memory turbulence as a concept, it worked very well, especially at like sort of the first couple of versions in Honkai Starbucks early days. I'm not sure if you guys still remember, like even in version 1.0 of the game itself, we already had specific buffs that shows the specific rate up unit, right? So for the OGs, for the unks that are still playing Honkai Starbucks to this day, you remember that the 1.0 buff was gonna be if your unit was a hunt or erudition, they get a free turn at the start of every wave, which allowed Scylla and Jingyuan to perform exceptionally well, right? And this has sort of been going on for like, I would say, the entire 2 years, where this specific buff is always tailored to make the new rate up unit perform a lot better than how they were gonna be performing without this buff. But the issue starts to arise, especially with, I would say, the last one. I think Nikado Avocado is gonna be a pretty big check for the last one as well as this one, because I think that it's not just the Turbulence buff anymore. It's more so to the point where the buffs themselves, they offer a much greater degree of success in tandem with the enemies, in tandem with the boss units. This is what I feel is the reason why this is going to be a lot prevalent, and which is why I also think that 42% of people thought that it was a little bit, or maybe not a little bit, but I basically think that it was harder, right? Because back then, whether or not you were able to fully utilize the Memory of Chaos buff, okay, we're going to exclude like 1.0 and 1.1 because those were like the super early days where you guys probably still haven't built up your teams yet, especially for free period light spender. Only the big boys, they just went all in level 80 and actually cleared the first few versions of Memory. But after like 1.0, 1.1, where they start to introduce more units and you players had a lot more time to build up their teams, I think the clear rate it starts to get not so much tied to whether or not you can make full use of the buffs, because the enemies themselves, they don't really have such a dedicated mechanic shielding. What I mean by mechanic shielding is essentially, for example, let's just go into this thingy right here over here. The first instance of, I would say, is a very strong mechanic shielding is going to be Nikado Avocado, right? The Giver, Master of Legions, Lance of Fury. This mechanic, it was really just a matter of, do you have enough either joint attacks or follow-up attacks or ways to deal with the spears? Because if you could not deal with them, you were gonna be at a substantially much harder time clearing this. Even if you had the Memory of Chaos buff, right, or if you didn't have the Memory of Chaos buff, the mechanic of the boss itself, it required a lot more narrowed down not as a team, but like the specific unit, right? The specific rate up unit. So for example, when this was launched, it was with Aglaya, but I'm sure you guys have also seen a lot of other clears unit. For example, like you can use Aggron, you can use D-Herda, you can use like, it is still quite clearable, but the thing is, if you were able to combine both at the same time, it was a matter of huge difference whether you could not even say 0 cycle, but like whether you could 3-star or you could not 3-star. And sometimes this mechanic, it is also tied to your speed. So if your units were not fast enough, right, you didn't have enough turns, or if your supports didn't deal damage themselves. So for example, if you for whatever reason you're not using Gallagher, you're using like a support or a sustain that literally just don't hit the enemy, you're gonna have a much harder time breaking wall armor or breaking the spears. And the problem with this is, this guy's the spears, right? I believe the percentage was 14.5%, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it, I can't remember, but it was like more than 10% of his max HP. And for every time you break wall armor, it's 10% of his max HP. And then after the wall armor broke, every time you dealt damage, it was 1% of his max HP. So like this enemy as a design, if you can make use of both the Memory of Chaos buff, which back then it was energy regeneration, right, as well as the Mimo Sprite thingy, you had a much easier time breaking the wall armor, right? The effective HP of Nikado Avocado, it was actually very, very low, because as long as you clear all the spears, you break all the wall armor, and you can like do additional damage when the wall armor is broken, he's actually not that hard, right? Especially when you compare to the first wave, which is True Swarm, which I would say that it is a lot more restrictive since it's gonna be an old unit that just got like HP inflated up to like a billion, right? Fast forward to this day, in this current of Memory of Chaos 12, which is going to be the Flame Reaver as well as Kafka. I think this is kind of reminiscent of like the last MOC as well, where your Flame Reaver is somewhat like Nikado Avocado, where if you can play to his mechanics, you're gonna have a much easier time. So for example, if you didn't play to his mechanics, he has a 40% damage reduction. If you couldn't kill the clones, he not only doesn't receive damage from the clones when they die, he also dealt a substantially higher damage to your entire team, which is often at times the matter of whether or not you could clear or could not even clear, or like your team dies or like they explode, right? And then Kafka is sort of reminiscent of, in my opinion, the previous MOC 12 True Swarm, or like the True Sting, which is she's like an old unit, but where it is somewhat like you can still use your old units to clear, but you will notice that the difficulty is going to be a lot more substantial, not really because of Kafka herself this time, right? For maybe the last MOC 12, the True Swarm, it was a pretty beefy ass guy. It was cause of these, but the bitch ass bitches. 160 toughness bar, by the way. Beefier than Kafka herself. So if you could not dispel the mark, right? The oral Nyx mark, it dealt like a kabillion damage. Unfortunately or fortunately for myself, I couldn't have the experience of seeing how much this damage truly was, but I have seen from my community that if you are struggling with dealing with the horses, you are really, really, really cooked for the second half. So it's sort of reminiscent in the previous rotation, right? This second half, I think players probably felt that it was more difficult than the first half because you didn't really have a brand new mechanic that can deal with this, especially if you didn't pull for the brand new recent use, right? So this one, if you can still interact with the mechanic enough, you're gonna be good. Which sort of brings us to the point right now, and why I say specifically Memory of Chaos 12 needs a rework, right? If you compare this to our pure fiction as well as Epoch Shadows, there's one very, very big thing which I would say makes this mode a lot more manageable for the player base, and that is gonna be this thingy right here. You had the option of choosing 3 different buffs which can benefit 3 different distinct archetypes, right? On top of the global buff that this has, this ability right here, right? This selection, this choice right here, it allowed the player base to have a much, much easier time to deal with the end game, specifically tailored to whatever team they are running. Alright, so maybe if you're somebody that if you didn't use your skill, right? If you didn't pull a full up, right? Maybe you're somebody that wanted to, let's just say you're playing Super Break, right? This buff is gonna help Super Break players, right? Maybe if you didn't play Super Break, you can run My Day, right? If you're running My Day, then this is gonna be able to help My Day, right? Sometimes even the buff itself, it also shields the rate up unit. For example, Sanity is meant to shield My Day, but these 2 other buffs also help you with your other units back in the past, where it's not a very black and white matter of, okay, if you didn't have this, you're cooked, and if you have this, you're not cooked, right? So I really, really like this idea, and this is not just for pure fiction, right? Even in Epoch Shadows, right? Even in Epoch Shadows, if you take a look over here in Epoch Shadows, bada boom, bada bing, bada bang, you also had the option of choosing 3 different buffs. So I do feel like at this point of time of the game, if Memory of Chaos 12, or not even just Memory of Chaos in general, if they had the option of doing this, right? So you still have the normal 2-team content, but at least give this added edge where different players that not necessarily procured the rate up or the recent units, they can still have a way to make the other units not really the best in slot, but at least keep up and not have that much of a difficulty spike compared to the other team comps that are gonna be compared to the rate up, right? So that is going to be my very first suggestion on the rework that is gonna be in MOC. I feel like the bottom line, it doesn't really affect that much for the players that can already clear, no problem whatsoever, right? If you can already clear the Memory of Chaos Trial without this, you are not really target audience. The target audience is more like the viewers that literally they cannot clear, guys. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the past 2 videos. Our Jingliu, I believe it was a Sunday plus a Sustainless Ramen and Pella. We were getting cooked. It was like 7 cycle on all 3 of a sustain. And at the Sustainless run, I feel like the Sustainless run is definitely doable, but it definitely needs a lot more effort to time your mimis and all that kind of stuff, right? So that is gonna be the target audience. And I feel like it helps the player base that are struggling in the end game a lot more, while not really affecting the bottom line of players that are already aiming to pull for the sake of pulling, right? Like if you're already pulling for meta, you're pulling for 0 cycling, right? You want to clear the best possible units, the best possible team, then whether or not this thing exists, it doesn't matter because they're gonna pull anyways. And then for players that are not able to do these things, right? They can't pull because of whatever they're saving for final, they're saving for fake or whatever. At least they also have like this quality of life that can help their experiences in the end game a lot more manageable. So that is going to be my first proposed buff to the Memory of Chaos 12 that we're going to be experiencing right here, right? Another thing that I want to talk about, which is going to be, actually, since we're already in A-Box Shadows, I kind of want to take a look over here. Notice how the reward system is manufactured over here. They have a specific Jade reward for every single star. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 12. Even if you were missing like 1 star or 2 star, it was in retrospect to whatever stars you had. Whereas for Memory of Chaos 12, your stars are separated in intervals of 3. Which is to say, for example, if you cleared MOC 12, but you had a 2 star, because you cleared in, I don't know, 15 cycles or 16 cycles, because of like HB and all that kind of stuff, you missed, let's just say you missed 1 star. You were at 35 out of 36. Because of that 1 star, you basically completely missed out on this entire reward. And I don't think it should be this punishing in the first place. Because if Pure Vision and Apoc Shadows, the modes that literally have the handicap, right? They have the handicap given to the player base where you can run all sorts of different buffs to make your time a lot easier. And even with all those buffs, you are getting 1 singular achievement for every single star. Then why is it that the mode, which technically is a lot more restrictive with a lot less buffs, still guarding the rewards by a 3-star per 3-star basis? So like if they were to swap, right? Like for example, if Pure Vision and Apoc Shadows, if they were to go by 3 stars per 3 stars, then I think it's actually kind of fair because it's technically the easier mode. It's a more accessible mode because you can run a variety of different team comps, right? But this is the case where the MOC is not only more restrictive, it is technically more difficult. You need a lot more investments, especially if you don't have the rate up units, but it is yet still guarding the resources by the 3-star level basis. So that is going to be my second recommendation to rework the MOC. Instead of making it 3 stars, make it 1 star, right? Make it 1 star. So for example, I feel that since we already have the option of, you full clear to level 9 anyways, fuck it, right? You just let it be and then make it such that every single 1 star of these represents the individual rewards, right? So for players that can already clear MOC 9, you get the benchmark, you get the baseline of rewards. So for example, 3 all the way to 9 times, it's 27, right? 3 to 27, just lump everything. You lump everything together, maybe not this concentrated, you can make it split a little bit more, and then from 27 to 36, you make it such that it's 28, 29, 30, 31, and you kind of split this evenly, so that even for players that were missing 1 star, in whichever status it might be, they can still get a potential to make them feel that their efforts were not wasted. So for example, one thing I want to say why this is the case, MOC 10 or MOC 11, I would say that sometimes players would find it even more difficult than the MOC 12. I'm not sure if it was you guys, for example, for my Bob account, the free-to-play Bob account, after a while, after I end the stream, we actually managed to clear MOC 12 3 stars. Post-stream, right? Post-stream, we actually managed to clear. But the thing is, for our MOC, I think it was 10 or 11, it was so difficult and we didn't have the damage that we had to run double sustain. We legit had to run double sustain off stream and do like I don't know how many cycles it took, but we still cleared it eventually, right? So sometimes, just because the later stages is like later, doesn't really mean that it's going to be more difficult, which is why I feel that having this individual star levels, it will make things a lot more appealing for the player base. So that is going to be my second rework recommendations. I have one last rework recommendations, and this is technically not really a new thing because I kind of said this in the past back then. It might not be a very black and white take where everybody will agree or everybody will disagree. 3-team content. I feel like as time passes, as more and more time goes on, 3-team content's significance would make the end game a lot better because you need to have a demand, right? You can't just keep releasing these supplies of the new latest 5 stars, but there's a lack of demand because you can only use 2 teams. And I feel that the more this game goes on, the longer it stays at 2-team content, the less slots, the less demand there are for your older units. Because every single time, like I mentioned, your job, there's only 2 applications. Right? There are only 2 vacancies. Our demand is Team 1 and Team 2. If you don't have it, especially with a mode as restrictive as it is right now in Memory of Chaos, having 3-team content, it will make it a lot more encouraging for players that actually have this multitude of team comps. Especially, we are still in version 3. Imagine version 4, version 5, versions that like all these like 3 or 4 years down the road, it's still 2 teams. And we just have no supply, or rather no demand, to make use of any of the older units. Which is why players will even feel that these brand new units, it power creeps their old units because there isn't a scenario where I would rather use my old units anyways. Because there isn't a demand for them, right? And if this goes on, for like, even if they were to continue up with like global passives, you know, insane multipliers, it doesn't really change the fact that you can still only use 2 teams, right? You can still only use it. I know the other side of the argument where if they make 3-team content, the argument where 3-team content is bad is that it's bad for, I guess, free plays and like low spenders who couldn't afford to build all these units, right? And then it's gonna penalize them. It's gonna penalize them for not being able to procure 3 teams in the first place, especially if we were to have 3 teams. And if this MOC buff was already this restrictive for 2 teams, imagine having 3 different teams that also need to suit to the condition of Memory of Chaos. So my solution, which is gonna be combining both the first and second, then you introduce a 3rd team. So now you have 3 different teams with 3 different ways that you can apply 3 different buffs. So now you have all 3 teams, each of them respectively have a buff that most likely best of the case is that they can benefit them, right? Even though it might be restrictive, you still now have the degree of freedom as well as the demand to actually make use of the teams that you previously did not use last time because you only had 2 banned slot teams with no other buffs, as at least for Memory of Chaos 12. I feel like this sentiment of like power creep and like this endgame steward is not really that prevalent for Pure Fiction as well as Epoch Shadows, mainly because these 2 other modes, the way the rewards are structured, as well as the fact that you have access to these 3 different buffs, it makes it more accessible to a larger audience of players. Whereas for majority of the complaints for like HP inflation, power creep, and like difficulty, most of them they are still tied to Memory of Chaos, and I feel that these 3 reasons are why Memory of Chaos needs a rework. And these are my rework suggestions. These are the problems. Let me know what you guys think of in the comments below, right? Yep, we are criticizing HSR every single day. Yippee! I hate HSR. I hate it. I hate Globe. That's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. The word of the day is going to be, chat, what should be the word of the day be? Black pepper chicken chopper, guys. I think that's my dinner later, right? So join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, and join Twitter. All the best. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.